My wife secretly transferred $350, $0 of our savings to her affair with her boss during our divorce. Then it turned out he was her long-lost childhood friend and the real reason she cheated. Now we're fighting over everything, including a house worth $600, $0. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing out how my wife turned out to be the biggest scam artist I've ever known. Honestly, the whole thing feels like a bad soap opera. It started with little signs, missing money, secretive phone calls, late nights. But I didn't want to believe it. I mean, we had our issues, sure, but I always thought we were solid. Until I found out she transferred $350, $0 of our savings to some guy she was supposedly working out her issues with. Turns out that guy was her boss, who, get this, she claimed she was just having an affair with because he was hot and successful. But it was way more complicated than that. It was a full-on betrayal, and it hit me like a freight train. It was a typical Wednesday when I first started noticing red flags. Had been unusually distant, snapping at me over small things. Her phone was glued to her hand more than usual, and she'd hide it whenever I came near. I caught her deleting texts, and her stories about late nights at work didn't add up. I even asked her outright once, and she shot me down, calling me paranoid. But I knew better. I started digging through her bank accounts, credit card statements, anything I could get my hands on. I had a gut feeling she was hiding something. Then I stumbled across the most shocking thing, an email from her bank. A transfer of $350, $0 made under her secret account. I stared at my screen in disbelief. That kind of money. It was a chunk of our savings, our future. I couldn't believe she'd do that without even telling me. I thought about her secretive behavior, the way she'd been acting like she was hiding something. The worst part, she'd been lying to my face for months. I remembered the nights she'd come home late, smelling like perfume and alcohol. I'd always thought she was working late or out with friends, but now I knew the truth. She'd been with her boss, and apparently they'd been planning this whole thing for a while. I was furious, confused, and hurt all at once. I felt betrayed on every level. I didn't sleep that night, replaying everything I knew in my head. The woman I loved, the woman I married, was lying to me and stealing from us. I kept asking myself, how did it get this bad? How could she do this to me, to us? And then I remembered the stories she'd spun about her boss, how she said he was just a good boss, how she'd never cheat, how I was overreacting. Yeah, right. The next day I confronted her. I sat her down in the kitchen, showing her the bank statement. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she'd break down. But instead she looked at me with that icy, bitchy glare she always had when she was caught. She lied right to my face, told me it was a mistake, that the money was supposed to be a loan, that she was planning to pay it back. But I knew better. I'd seen the emails, the messages she'd been deleting. It was clear she'd been planning this for months, and the money was just the tip of the iceberg. Her reaction was infuriating. She told me I was overreacting, that I didn't understand her. She called me paranoid, insecure, and said I was ruining everything because I couldn't handle her success. She even had the audacity to say that her affair with her boss was just sex, that it meant nothing, that she loved me but needed this escape. That was the moment I realized I was dealing with a woman who had no respect for me or our marriage. She was more interested in her own lies, her own affairs, and her greed than in fixing what we had. I felt my blood boiling, but I kept my cool, knowing I needed to think carefully about what to do next. I wasn't about to let her keep lying and stealing without consequences. That night, I couldn't sleep. The betrayal was like a punch to the gut, but what really shook me was the realization that she had been planning this for months. The $350, $0 wasn't just some impulsive mistake. She transferred it secretly, with no regard for how it would destroy us. I kept thinking about the life we'd built, the house we bought, the future I thought we were working toward. All of it gone in a matter of months thanks to her greed and selfishness. I spent the next day doing what I do best, digging. I pulled out her phone, her emails, her bank statements, anything I could find. I needed to know how deep this rabbit hole went. And what I found was even worse. Turns out, wasn't just cheating on me with her boss, she'd been close with him since college, long before I even knew her. They had a long history and she'd kept it from me. All those late nights, the secret messages, the business dinners, they were all part of a bigger picture. She'd been hiding this affair for years, and now it exploded in my face. I also uncovered the fact that she had been funneling money through fake invoices, cash withdrawals, and even offshore accounts. It was a complex scheme, and she'd covered her tracks well. But I had enough evidence to piece it all together. She transferred the money to him, and he'd been using it to buy his own house, invest, live a lavish life, all while I was clueless. Thinking we were secure, I was furious, not just at her betrayal but at myself for ever trusting her. How could I have missed all the signs? I remember walking around the house feeling like I was in a nightmare. Every corner reminded me of what we'd lost. The photos from our wedding, the memories of our first house, the little things she'd always pretend to care about. All of it was tainted now. I kept asking myself how I let it get so bad, how I was so blind to her lies. I thought I knew her, but she was just a master manipulator. She lied about everything, her feelings, her fidelity, her intentions. And now I was left holding the pieces of a shattered life. That evening I confronted her again. This time I was colder, more calculated. I told her I knew everything: the money, the affair, her long-standing relationship with. Her face twisted in a mixture of anger and shock, but she kept denying it. She said I was crazy, that I was reading too much into things, that I was just jealous and insecure. She claimed she loved me, but her words sounded hollow. I could see her eyes darting around, trying to come up with another lie. She was trying to spin her way out of it, but I wasn't buying it anymore. I told her she needed to leave, that I wanted her out of the house and out of my life. She screamed, called me a controlling bastard, and tried to guilt-trip me about the house, the money, everything. But I knew this wasn't going to be that simple. I also started to realize that her greed wasn't just about the affair. It was about money, power, control. She saw me as an obstacle, someone she could manipulate to get what she wanted. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. I needed to protect what was mine, what I'd worked for all these years. The house, the savings, my dignity. I filed for divorce the next day, knowing this was just the beginning of a long battle. She had already taken so much from me, but I wasn't going to let her take everything. I was angry, hurt, but also determined. If she thought she could cheat, steal, and manipulate her way out of this, she had another thing coming. I was planning my revenge, and I was going to make sure she paid for every lie, every betrayal, every dollar she stole. After I filed for divorce, everything started moving fast. Of course, was furious. She played the victim, as usual, crying about how I was ruining her life, how she still loved me, and how I was just a jealous old man who couldn't handle her success. She spun her web of lies even thicker, claiming she was forced into the affair because I was emotionally distant, that she only did it to feel alive again. It was all bullshit, but hearing her say it made me sick. She had always been good at lying, but now I saw her for what she truly was: a manipulative, selfish bitch who'd burn everything down to get her way. Meanwhile, I was busy gathering the evidence I needed to protect myself legally and financially. I contacted a lawyer, started reviewing our finances in detail, and made sure I had copies of everything: bank statements, emails, texts, even her phone logs. I wanted to be prepared for whatever she threw at me. I also started looking into her affair with more deeply. Turns out was not just some boss she was screwing around with, he was her childhood friend. They'd known each other for years, from elementary school. I couldn't believe it. All those years I thought she was cheating on me with some random guy, and it was her long-lost friend all along. That revelation made my stomach turn even more. She kept insisting she loved me, that she was sorry, and that it was just sex, just a mistake. But I knew better. Love doesn't transfer millions of dollars to a guy you barely see, nor does it keep secrets for years. I saw through her bullshit. Still, I kept my guard up. I wasn't about to let her manipulate me into feeling guilty or backing down. I told her she needed to leave the house, and she refused at first, throwing a fit, calling me a controlling bastard. I told her I'd already spoken to the lawyer and that I was serious about protecting what's mine. That was the last straw for her. She finally packed her bags and left, but not before calling me every name under the sun. The house felt emptier then. Ever after she left, I stayed there trying to process everything. I kept replaying her words, her lies, her sneaky moves. The money she stole, the affair she had with, the long years of deception, all of it hit me hard. I'd always believed in our marriage, in her. Now I was faced with the harsh reality that I'd been blind to her true nature all along. I felt betrayed, angry, and deeply hurt. But at the same time, I knew I had to stay strong, not just for myself, but for whatever was left of my future. One thing I couldn't ignore was the house, our biggest asset, worth about $600, $0. She was claiming she deserved half, even though she'd betrayed me and stolen from us. I started to dig into the legal side of things, talking with my lawyer about how to protect my share. She was already talking about equal rights, but I had proof of her financial misconduct, her affair, and her betrayal. I was determined to fight for what was rightfully mine. I also knew I had to come up with a plan to handle the money she'd transferred. She'd hidden it well, but I had my suspicions about where it all went. During this chaos, I also found out that he'd used some of the money to buy a house of his own. It was all connected: the secret transfers, the offshore accounts, the long-standing friendship turned dirty. I felt a mix of rage and helplessness. How could she do this? How could she lie to me for so long? I was trying to keep it together, but honestly, I was a mess inside. I'd never felt so betrayed in my life. The woman I married, the woman I still loved in some twisted way, had turned into a con artist, a liar, and a thief. And I was left to pick up the pieces, wondering if I'd ever trust again or if I'd just become another victim of her lies. The days following her departure were some of the darkest I've ever experienced. Every morning I woke up with a knot in my stomach, knowing that the woman I loved, the woman I shared everything with, had been plotting against me for years. I couldn't shake the image of her with their long-standing friendship twisted into a betrayal that cut so deep it felt like I'd been gutted. I kept thinking about the money she transferred, how she had hidden it, how she'd lied about everything, and how much she'd stolen from us. It was like waking up from a nightmare I couldn't escape. I spent hours on the phone with my lawyer trying to figure out my options. The house was worth around $600, $0, and I knew she'd come after her half, even though she didn't deserve it. I had proof of her affair, the secret money transfers, and her long-standing relationship with. It was clear she'd been planning this for a long time, and I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything. I also started working on tracking the money she'd moved, where it went, who it was with, how much she'd hidden offshore. It was like trying to put together a giant puzzle, and every piece I found just made me angrier. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but feel the emotional toll. I'd always thought we had a future, a good life together, and now that image was shattered. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and downright furious. How could she do this? How could she lie to me for so long? I started questioning everything: my judgment, my trust, my worth. I kept replaying her words, her lies, her manipulations. It was like I'd been living in a carefully constructed illusion, and now it was all crumbling down around me. One night I found myself sitting in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. I remembered all the times she'd been bitchy, dismissive, and outright cruel when I asked about her late nights or her secretive phone calls. I realized she'd been playing me from the beginning, using sex, her charm, her lies, whatever it took to keep me from seeing the truth. She convinced herself she could get away with it, that her money and her affair with would never be exposed. But I'd cracked her facade, and now she was panicking. I also started thinking about what I needed to do to protect myself legally. I had a good lawyer, and I knew I had grounds to fight for the house and the money. She stolen from us, lied to my face, and betrayed me on every level, and I was determined to make her pay. I wasn't just fighting for the house, I was fighting to reclaim my dignity and stop her from walking all over me. I knew she'd try to spin it, to blame me, to call me jealous or insecure, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of this. I had evidence, and I was ready to use it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about money or a house. It was about respect. about standing up for myself after being so thoroughly betrayed. I'd always been a straightforward guy, honest, trusting, but now I saw that I'd been naive, was a master manipulator, and I'd been her target. I had to rebuild, but first, I had to get her out of my life completely. I told her to leave, I filed the papers, and I started planning my next moves. I knew she'd fight me tooth and nail, but I was prepared. I wasn't going to let her steal my life, my savings, or my future anymore. This was just the beginning of what I knew would be a long, bitter fight to reclaim what was mine. The legal battle started almost immediately after she moved out, had become even more aggressive, claiming she was entitled to half the house, half the savings, everything. She threw tantrums, called in favors, and tried to spin it like I was the one cheating her out of her rights. She insisted she deserved half because she was married to me, even though I had proof of her betrayal, her money transfers, and her affair with. I knew she was just trying to manipulate the situation, but I also knew I had the upper hand. At least, I hoped I did. My lawyer advised me to document everything, every email, every message, every financial transaction. We filed for a fair split of the assets, and I made sure to include all the evidence of her infidelity and financial misconduct. The house was worth about $600, $0, and I was prepared to fight tooth and nail. I had a feeling she'd try to claim she was entitled to everything, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I also started looking into the offshore accounts she'd used to hide the money. That was a game changer. We hired a forensic accountant to trace the funds, and I was stunned to see how much she'd concealed. Meanwhile, she kept playing the victim, crying about how I was destroying her life, how she only cheated because I was cold and distant, and how she deserved her share of everything. She even had the nerve to suggest we could work things out, but I knew better. This wasn't about fixing our marriage, it was about her greed and her lies. I refused to be manipulated anymore. I told her she needed to accept that she was going to lose everything if she kept fighting so dirty. One day she showed up at my house unannounced, furious and crying. She begged me to drop the lawsuit, to settle quietly, and to forget about the money. She claimed she'd change, that she'd stop her lies, that she'd be a better wife. I looked her in the eyes and told her she'd already crossed the line, that I wasn't going to let her ruin me for her own selfish reasons. I told her she could either face the consequences of her actions or keep fighting and see how far I was willing to go. She left in a huff, calling me every name under the sun. Things got nastier in court. She accused me of controlling behavior, of trying to steal her rightful share, and even tried to spin the affair as somehow my fault. But I had the evidence, emails, bank statements, witness testimonies, that painted a very different picture. The judge saw through her lies and was clear that she'd betrayed me, that she'd stolen from us, and that she had no right to claim half the house or the savings. The court awarded me the house, and I managed to get most of the money she'd transferred back from offshore accounts, although some of it was gone for good. Throughout it all, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. I'd fought hard and I'd won what I could, but the emotional toll was heavy. I was angry that I'd trusted her for so long, that I'd let her manipulate me into thinking I was overreacting. Now I saw the truth. She was a liar, a thief, a woman who destroyed her own marriage for greed and sex. I also learned that no matter how much you love someone, if they're willing to betray you that deeply, you have to fight for yourself. First, I realized that sometimes the only way to protect what's yours is to stand up and fight back, no matter how painful it gets. I'm still trying to put everything behind me, but I know I'll never forget. The lesson is clear: trust is fragile and betrayal cuts deep. If you ever find yourself in a similar mess, gather your evidence, fight for what's right, and don't let anyone take advantage of you. You have to be your own strongest advocate, because if you're not, nobody else will be. Looking back now, I realize how much this whole ordeal changed me. I used to believe in the idea that marriage was sacred, that honesty and loyalty were the foundation of everything. Turns out, I was naive. Showed me that some people are just masters of manipulation, willing to lie, cheat, and steal their way through life if it benefits them. I've learned that trust, once broken this badly, is almost impossible to rebuild. and that sometimes the only way to move forward is to cut your losses and start over. The house, which was once a symbol of our future, is now just a reminder of how everything fell apart. I fought hard to keep it and I won, but it's strange how material things lose their meaning after such betrayal. I don't see her in that house anymore. It's just me now, trying to piece together what's left of my life. The money she transferred, most of it recovered, some gone, feels like a small victory in a war I never wanted to fight. But the real victory is in realizing I'm better off without her lies polluting everything I thought was real. I've come to understand that revenge isn't about getting even or punishing her. That's just a distraction. It's about reclaiming your life, your dignity, and learning to trust yourself again. I've learned that some people are just willing to burn everything down to get what they want, but that doesn't mean you have to burn with them. I found strength in standing up for myself, in fighting for what's fair, even when it seemed hopeless. Now, I focus on rebuilding. I've started therapy, working through the anger and betrayal. I've learned to set boundaries, to be cautious about who I trust, and to value myself more than ever. Because if there's one thing this whole nightmare has taught, it's that loyalty and honesty are rare. And when you find someone who truly has those qualities, hold on tight. To anyone reading this and going through something similar, I'll say this. Don't let the betrayal define you, but don't ignore the signs either. Pay attention to the red flags, trust your gut, and don't be afraid to fight for what's rightfully yours. Sometimes the only way out is through the storm, and if you come out the other side, you'll be stronger, wiser, and ready to rebuild a life on your own terms. I don't regret the fight because now I know my worth, and that's the biggest lesson I'll carry forward.